All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to It's My Vote, AUW Priorities in the 2024 Election, a webinar by AUW and the AUW Action Fund. My name is Robin Lucas. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Grassroots Advocacy Manager at AUW. Tonight, we're joined by Gloria Blackwell, the CEO of AUW, and Megan Cassell, the Senior Director of Policy and Member Advocacy. Real quick before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared online afterwards. We also will provide a resource list that includes the materials and sources noted throughout the presentation, because tonight, as you won't be surprised, since it is about the issues this election, can have a lot of information. Also, as we go, you can direct any questions about the programming in the Q&A box on Zoom. We'll save most of the questions until the end, but I do encourage you to write them in as you think of them. And with that, I welcome Gloria to share some thoughts.
Thank you so much, Robin, and welcome everyone. I want to start off by really sharing why this conversation is so important. It's important because the choices that we make at the ballot box can open doors for generations of women to come. As informed voters, we must support candidates who prioritize equitable access to education, promote opportunities for all women to achieve economic security, and support policies that dismantle barriers to a diverse and inclusive society. Since 1995, AAUW has conducted voter education and Get Out the Vote, or fondly we refer to it as GOTV, activities in nearly every state. The campaign has succeeded in educating women voters on the issues at stake, as well as increasing women's activism nationwide, recruiting new members, forging diverse partnerships, increasing visibility, and fostering leadership development. Together, we can ensure that more women are informed and motivated participants in the election. The It's My Vote campaign aims to increase the capacity of AAUW branches to participate, plan, and even lead voter education and voter mobilization activities in communities around our country. In 2024, we're focused on several of the most critical issues facing our country. Let's harness our collective power and drive meaningful change. Between now and Election Day, please encourage conversation around the issues that affect our families and our communities. Ask the tough questions. Where do our candidates stand on issues that matter to women? Because when women vote, we make a difference. AAUW also gratefully acknowledges the members of the Mooney Lecce Giving Circle for their generous support for our voter engagement work. Now, I'm going to turn it back over to Megan and Robin to share what our plans are for the year ahead. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gloria. As Gloria mentioned, AUW has a long tradition of get out the vote work and voter engagement because it is part of our public policy priorities to advocate for public discussion to ensure enlightened decisions on these priorities. So what we're doing tonight is we're going to walk through some of the issues in the voter issue guide. And let me explain what that is. The voter issue guide is not a comprehensive list of all of the issues that are impacting gender equity, but rather they're a high-level view pulled from our public policy priorities that are meant to provide some context and help people understand how their lives are impacted by the people who are on the ballot this year. You will hear Robin and I often taking much more of a federal view, a congressional view, but these issues and the questions for candidates really can apply to all levels of elections. So the guide is going to provide that high-level view. We're also going to provide you with some questions. What should you be asking the candidates? And just in case you don't actually have an opportunity to ask your candidates in person, what are some of the questions that you can be asking within your community? And questions to prompt some community conversation about these policies. I also do want to be really clear that Our positions and the guide are shaped with our commitment to being nonpartisan and fact-based and acting with integrity. That is our commitment to you. And as part of our work to strive to be inclusive and intersectional, we are making the printable version of the guide, which will be up on the website soon, will be available in both English and Spanish. So all of the content is up on the Action Fund site right now, and we'll direct you to all to that, but want to let you know a little bit more about what's coming as well. So the issues dive into three pillars, three basic pillars of our work, which really come down to education, economic security, and civil rights. But as I said, the guide is really meant to begin the conversation, not be the end of it. And let me say one more time, this is nonpartisan, but it doesn't mean that we are not political. AAUW can be political. And despite what you've heard about how much people are politically divided, partisan divided within our country, we can be both. We can be political and nonpartisan. So we invite you to use this guide in that spirit and to have those conversations in that spirit. And as we talk about ways that you can use the guide and use the issues in your communities, we will provide some additional guidance as to how to stay on the right side of being nonpartisan, and we'll share that other guidance with you. One thing I will tell you is you won't see AAUW endorsing any candidates. That is a hard line for us, but what we can do and what we will do is to continue to talk about the issues. And for folks in some states, we'll also talk about ballot issues because we all have an interest in those. As I mentioned, later this summer, we'll also share with you head-to-head guides that provide information on how some candidates for Congress stand on our issues. And early in the fall, before the elections, we'll be sharing our biannual congressional voting record so that you can see how current members of Congress have voted. But before we get there, as I said, let us talk about the issues that are important, go through some of what you'll find in the guide, and then we'll talk more about how we can use this together in communities. As I mentioned, we chose a couple of particular issues, not comprehensive, but really just a beginning step into this conversation in this community. But let me start with gender-based discrimination in schools. AAUW's policy position is that we support a strong system of public education that's promoting gender fairness and is addressing barriers and implicit biases that are hindering the advancement of girls. What I have up on the screen, for those who can see it, is really just one aspect of what happens when we don't have gender equity and support. What you're seeing on screen is real distinct differences with women in STEM. When we don't provide an educational environment where girls and women are supported in science, technology, engineering, and math, we end up seeing discrepancies in the workforce. And these are things that have an impact on women's economic security in the future. And I bring this up in the context of Title IX. We're expecting very soon to see new rules, new regulations for Title IX that will really strengthen what those gender equity protections are. And you'll certainly hear so much more about us with that. But just as a reminder that Title IX and supporting gender equity in schools is so much more than sports. So as we think about gender discrimination in schools, what we're showing up on the screen, just a couple of examples of what are the questions that you can be asking the candidates in your races, in your communities. Ask folks, what do they feel that the role of the government is in addressing what these systemic issues of discrimination in education are, and what are the policies that they should support. There's more information in the guide, but this is what you can expect to see from this. One of the other issues that we want to bring attention to is diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. AUW, part of our public policy priorities is working to improve racial, ethnic, and gender justice, and that has to be embedded in everything. And this includes work to eradicate intersectional biases, but especially in education, how can we create a culture of involvement, respect, inclusion, and connectivity among students, among faculty? And yet, in the past couple of years, this past year alone, we are seeing more and more political attacks about these very ideals, about political attacks rather than talking about the benefits and the value of diverse ideas and backgrounds being appreciated, understood, and respected. What we're showing you here is one of our partners, actually the Chronicle of Higher Education actually keeps a map of legislation that's targeting DEI initiatives across the country. And you can see that it is quite widespread. And as of the end of March, there were 9 states that had laws banning DEI in some fashion. They were banned in at least 9 states, and several others are actively pursuing this. And AAUW has even signed on to letters opposing this type of action at the congressional level. So with that as a background, it really is important that we ask our politicians, that we ask the folks who want to serve in elected office, how do they feel about the role of diversity and inclusion in higher education? What can we do to foster and support an inclusive learning environment rather than a divisive one? As we're talking about higher education, we can't talk about higher ed without talking about affordability and how unaffordable college has gotten. And part of what AAUW has worked on for years is looking to support access to higher ed, whether that be through our fellowships and grants, whether that be for our support for increasing Pell Grants, or whether that be our policy work looking at the impact of student debt. And wanted to share with you just another view of how different things are, how different gender equity is depending on where you live, how different the financial situation is for individuals across the states. And probably don't need to tell this audience, but Americans are now looking at more than $1.7 trillion in outstanding student debt. We're also looking at every generation holding student debt, being tremendously impacted by student debt. In fact, one of the highest groups that is defaulting on loans is over 65 years old. We're talking about decades of debt that comes alongside higher education. But we can do something about this. And we can make sure that our elected officials are prioritizing this, that we want them to see the value of higher education in the same way that we do. And we want to ask them what their plans are. How are they going to support making college more affordable? How are they going to support income repayment plans and other opportunities to make the crushing burden of debt more manageable for women and their voters across their states and communities? I'm going to turn it over to Robin to talk about a couple of other issues.
Thank you. So AAUW promotes the economic, social, and physical well-being of all persons. To achieve this well-being, we support the advancement of many interconnected policies. And in this year's election, we focused on 3 key issues that are critical to economic security for women. First being pay equity. AAUW advocates for pay equity and fairness in compensation and benefits, which means we support a variety of policies in addition to equal pay, including salary transparency and ending the use of salary histories in the hiring process. There are so many policy approaches to this issue because of its complexity and pervasive nature. On average, women working full-time in the United States are paid about 84 cents for every dollar paid to men who are working full-time. That gap widens to 78 cents when we include all women in the workforce. This gap persists across races, ethnicities, and occupations, and has a disproportionate impact on women of color. To underscore the deep impact of this issue around the country, we wanted to share this map here from our partners at the National Women's Law Center. They have further compiled the lifetime accumulation of what a woman would lose over the course of their careers. The map here showcases the average lifetime loss for women in each state, ranging from $250,000 over the course of their career to upwards of $700,000. And for some women of color, this lifetime loss, it reaches over $1 million. Next slide, please. So among other questions and background information, the voter issue guide suggests asking candidates directly, what role do you think the federal government should play in addressing pay equity? And how would you address systemic inequities in the workplace for women of color? And personally, I think that all candidates should have answers to these questions. So let's get them on the record for it. Next slide, please. Now, to achieve pay equity, benefits and work-life policies must also be addressed, namely paid family, medical, and sick leave. AAUW works to expand greater availability of and access to a high standard of benefits and policies that promote work-life balance, including quality and affordable dependent care and paid family, medical, and sick leave. The benefits of paid parental, family, and sick leave are well documented and have widespread support, yet the vast majority of working people in the United States still don't have access to this basic protection. While the US is the only industrialized nation that does not ensure paid leave, many states are stepping up to fill this gap. Shown in the map here, the US Department of Labor has mapped out which 13 states plus the District of Columbia have created paid family and medical leave programs, as well as the paid disability leave in Hawaii and the paid disability and maternity leave provided in Puerto Rico. As women continue to be the primary caregivers for children and elderly family members, they also continue to disproportionately bear the economic opportunity cost of the lack of paid parental, family, and sick leave. Next slide, please. So when looking at the voter issue guide, you'll see the questions focus on paid family, medical, and sick leave with, for example, here in the second one, the addition of asking candidates to support affordable and accessible childcare. Next slide. And the third issue for economic security, we have reproductive rights and abortion access. AAUW trusts that everyone can make their own informed choices about their reproductive lives without government interference and supports increased access to reproductive health care and services. We support efforts to ensure everyone has access to comprehensive reproductive health care, including abortion, contraception, and fertility services, no matter where they live. Reproductive rights and access to abortion care are fundamental pillars in promoting equity in education and economic security. Because when people have control over their reproductive decisions, they can better plan for their futures, including their educational and career paths. This issue includes all reproductive health care. However, since the US Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, restrictions have overwhelmingly focused on preventing or limiting access specifically to abortion. Abortion care is now wholly illegal or severely restricted in the majority of the country. And with only 9 states and DC having complete protection for abortion care in place today. Access to abortion care should not be dependent on your zip code or finances. And over the last decade, the courts and state legislatures have also created roadblocks to contraception access and have built up ambiguity around access to fertility treatments. These laws restricting access to abortion care and the full range of reproductive health care disproportionately affect low-income women, women of color, and women with disabilities. Next slide, please. That said, there are those 11 states on the map that are either have have included or are working to include abortion access on the ballot in this year's election. So if you're one of those states and want to get involved, please reach out to your state leaders and AUW. You can email us policy@auw.org, and we look forward to supporting you. I want to make sure that folks, when you're looking at the voter issue guide, I've started to highlight a few of the questions. Megan highlighted a few in the sections already, and the few that she'll circle up with next. But it is really important to directly ask these questions to your candidates and take them into consideration when talking with folks and considering what actions you want to take this year in the election. With that, next slide, and I'll hand it back to you, Megan. Oh, you're on mute.
First day of Zoom. The importance of voting rights is critical when we're talking about getting out the vote and making sure that everybody's voice is heard. We've heard so much information about efforts to vastly restrict people's ability to fully engage in their civil and constitutional rights. And AUW's position is that expanding voting rights is essential to guaranteeing equality, individual rights, and social justice overall. In the past couple of years, we're seeing unprecedented attacks again on voting in terms of voting related laws. Just looking at data from last year, there's a really stark divide. You have about 14 states that are passing restrictive voting laws, and then while others are moving to implement changes to make voting more accessible. The states, there was more states that were enacting restrictive laws. So we really are, in this regard, a country divided. That this map, what you're looking at right now, is the 14 states where voters are facing new restrictions. And what it's not showing you is where there are already existing laws that are really anti-voter. Again, one of the reasons we're sharing some of these maps is really to give you an indication of how important these issues are, that these issues should not depend on what zip code you're in, what community you're in. And it isn't just one legislator, it isn't just one lawmaker. It is who are we looking at for our communities, but also for our country? Who is it that we want to be? What is it that we value? And as I said, AUW values expanding voting rights. So this is definitely a question that we think is important to ask the candidates, asking candidates of all levels, what steps would they take to expand voting rights? And what steps are they going to take to address misinformation about the integrity of our elections? This is one element that is so discouraging, especially for people who are not consistent voters, especially for new voters. The more misinformation and disinformation that is out there, it really dissuades people from taking that step to voting. So one of the things that we can do is ask the questions, push back on the misinformation, and make sure that people are not only educated about the issues, but also educated about how to vote in your community. And we are partnering with When We All Vote, which has a lot of very detailed information about how to vote in your community. So you will have access to this so that you can be a resource in your community. The last particular issue that we wanted to draw attention to is the Equal Rights Amendment. And when I'm referring to the Equal Rights Amendment, I'm actually referring to the US Constitutional Amendment. And let me just be very clear. AUW's position is that we wholeheartedly support the fact that the Equal Rights Amendment has been ratified by all the 3/4 of the state. It passed the Congress and House, and the only thing left to go is to have the Equal Rights Amendment published as the 28th Amendment and affirmed. What would the impact of this be? Pretty substantial. Most people don't realize that gender equality is not in the Constitution. And some of you on this call have probably heard me talking about the Equal Rights Amendment quite a bit. There are still efforts in Congress to move forward and demonstrate political pressure to move this ahead. But I have to tell you that when we're sitting here in April of 2024, it is now incumbent on us to also make this an election issue. We need to make sure that our elected officials know that we know that this is not yet published as the 28th Amendment, and we know that it should be. So when it comes to the Equal Rights Amendment, we have one question that we should be asking every level of government. And do they support the publication of the Equal Rights Amendment? We need to know what people feel about this. I will say one piece, because it relates to what Robin said about access to reproductive health care. We just saw the impact of what an Equal Rights Amendment can do. Just in January of this year, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court demonstrated the importance of having gender equity enumerated in a state constitution. And they held that a Medicaid ban on abortion was sex discrimination under that state's ERA. That is just one example of how the Equal Rights Amendment will really impact our issues when it is affirmed and published. So we're going to move in a different direction. I'm going to move things over to Robin to talk about, this is great. We've talked about the issues. Now, what do you do with the guide? What do you do in your community? So Robin, if you want to take it from here.
Yes, thank you. Next slide. So let's talk about how to engage with your communities this year and contribute to a well-informed electorate. First, I do want to circle back to what Megan talked about earlier, and we have discussed in past webinars. So for AUW leaders joining us today in particular, before taking action on behalf of an AUW branch or state organization with voter engagement, you do need to know what form of nonprofit your branch is registered as, like 501c3 or C4. And if this is all, if this doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. You can reach out to us, but there are some activities that we'll get into more in our next training that look a little different depending on this detail. But that said, all AUW branches and state organizations may conduct election-related activities as long as they follow two rules. The activities do not expressly advocate for or against any clearly identified partisan candidate or political party. And two, the preparation for and conduct of the election-related activities are not coordinated with any candidate or political party. So essentially, you can't endorse a partisan candidate, which Megan said earlier, and I want to repeat, or political party. And you have to invite, if you're having an event that has candidates there, you have to invite all parties and candidates to that event. So next slide, please. Ways you can engage. You can help achieve two key goals in the voter education space with us. One is establishing positions on the issues, getting candidates to take into consideration and answer questions about AUW priorities, ideally in public and or on the record. And two, educating voters on key issues and the candidates' positions. The It's My Vote campaign aims to support well-informed voters, and that means knowing what is important and where the candidates stand on these issues. It's not enough for the candidates to answer your questions. Like I said, everyone also then needs to know their answers. So that comes to here, engaging with your candidates. Next slide, please. So first, have you noticed that they don't have a public position on one of our issues? You can make it your goal to get as many candidates as possible to answer your questions. The AUW priorities this election are significant issues impacting our country, and candidates should care about all of them. Let's start with that first goal, though, obtaining the candidate positions on our issues. This Their stances can be found in many places, and we'll go more in depth on how to research candidate positions in our next training on creating local guides and resources for your area. But today we'll review some activities and events you can take the lead on. I do want to note that we have some examples here. The voter issue guide and It's My Vote materials have more examples on how to interact, what to focus on. I just want to underline, none of these lists are exhaustive. And end of the day, you know your communities best. You know what will activate them and engage them best. And you can get really creative with voter education events. So back to engaging with candidates. Got 3 examples here. You can talk to the candidates at events, ask them questions, include the voter issue guide topics. You can also host a candidate forum that can include inviting AUW members and the general public. That's also a great opportunity to partner with like-minded organizations. And you can just call the campaign offices directly to urge them to get their candidates on record about these key issues. Now I'm going to drop in the chat in a second some links to 2 of these examples that I'm going to talk about. First, one here, how to host a candidate forum. And then later, how to host an issue forum. We do have guides on these already. So drop the link in the chat already for that one. So we also wanted to note, though, in many areas, we know that the opportunity to engage directly with candidates can be difficult to find. So if you're determined to ask your questions directly and want to find events where candidates will be at, you can stay engaged with them through newsletters, social media, their campaign websites, their official websites if they're incumbents. And we encourage you to reach out as many ways as possible and as is feasible for your area. Next slide, please. So the other side of that is educating and interacting with voters. Educating voters about key issues and candidate positions is critical. Today's webinar and the voter issue guide resource are foundational tools for you that you can use to guide your work. You can rely on the background information and suggested questions for voter education activities and utilize those with what you think will resonate with your community. Next slide, please. So activities in the voter education space, like I said, can get really creative. And truly, some of the most fun ways that you can foster voter participation is through voter education, directly engaging them on issues that matter most. This is where folks who, whether they have registered to vote, have registered or aren't registered yet, but want to, we know that engaging people and inspiring them to vote is really important, and connecting them with the issues that impact them is one of the biggest drives to get folks to engage in an election. So this educating voters cannot be overstated enough that this is a really critical aspect of voter participation and ways that you can contribute to your community. So here we have some suggestions, including organizing an issue forum. So back to the link that I dropped in the chat already, which can be similar to this webinar or structured more like a town hall, so voters can participate and ask questions. Hosting an issue forum is also another great way to engage with like-minded organizations. So you can collaborate with them on either an issue forum or another event that could be like a panel discussion on shared priority issues, or tabling at an event where each organization shares their priorities and voters can engage and ask questions in a less formal way. And then share with friends and family. So this might seem like a smaller ask, that I'm adding here, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have conversations with your loved ones about AUW priority issues. It's not a small ask, and it absolutely is a critical one that I just had to add in here. Next slide, please. So the big goal of tonight, asking you to make a plan to support voter education. Today, if you could pledge to take one action in support of voter education this year, you'll have contributed to our democracy. AUW and the AUW Action Fund websites, like I mentioned, do have an ever-expanding number of resources and guides to help support your planning and in achieving your advocacy goals. But for a quick snapshot of what you can get started with today, just outline some real quick goals. First, picking which of the goals you want. Do you want to engage with candidates and find their positions, or educate voters on the issues and candidate positions. That then brings you very quickly to helping you determine who your audience is, the candidates or voters, and help you pick an activity, say a candidate forum or an issues-focused event. You can then decide who to host this with. Do you want to host it with other AAUW leaders and members? Do you want to collaborate with another organization in your area, or do you just want to host it in your own private space with your communities? And the why is really important. So using the voter issue guide to continue to go back to the core issues that'll drive any of your engagement opportunities and really inspire people to engage and vote. And then finally, how, like I said, AAUW and the AAUW Action Fund do have step-by-step guides for you, including on how to host a candidate forum and issue forum, that are really great resources for honestly planning events broadly. They can apply to not just those two topics. So they've got some tips and tricks in it that'll help you with any kind of event planning. And this year you can expect several more similar guides. Next slide, please. That said, we do have, jumped all over the place. So let's go to the civic holidays. There we go. So here's some key dates to keep in mind this year. These are critical days to engage on, and particularly on social media, and to plan your events around. Starting with 100 days from Election Day on July 31st. This includes National Voter Registration Day and Education Week in September and October. So these are just really helpful like activation dates that you can aim for. Next slide, please. And we have a series of trainings, including tonight, but we have a whole series of trainings still coming your way, so stay tuned. The sessions are already up online for registration. I will drop the link in the chat to highlight that, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next training as well. So next slide, and back to you, Megan.
Oops. Let me back up and just take myself off mute. Really do want to thank everybody for their interest in this. There's still a number of questions that we will make sure to have answers to. We are going to share all of this information, the slides, the recording, and links to a lot of the information that we were talking about, because what we're hoping that this guide and that this conversation does is that it's motivating curiosity, interest, and conversations in your community. Conversations with your friends, people in your AAUW branch, people in your churches, people in other groups that you're hanging out, you're familiar with. I also want to stress the importance of working together. AAUW members alone are one part of a much larger effort to make sure that everybody has the information about the issues, the information about how to vote. Working in collaboration with partners in your community is incredibly important. I just want to give an example. Gloria and I sit on National Strategy Task Force on the Equal Rights Amendment with the ERA Coalition. And we sit around that table with our sisters from League of Women Voters, from NOW, from Feminist Majority, a whole slew of others. Robin and I are in coalitions on student debt with NAACP, with a myriad of other groups, Student Borrowers Protection Center, groups that have other branches and members in your communities. On any one of the issues that we've talked about, there are partners, many of whom we've probably worked with before. But maybe there are some in your community that you haven't worked with yet. We have talked a lot about, we use the IRS terms, 501c3s, 501c4s. That's just IRS terminology for don't get too involved in what's called electioneering. Our job is not to try to impact the outcome of the election. Our role here is to educate people about the importance of the election, how the elections at every level are impacting policies that we care about. They're impacting policies that affect gender equity in education, higher education, and our civil rights. So working together, we really can make a difference. So we really appreciate your being here. And if you ever have questions about whether a collaboration is appropriate or not, Robin and I are here as a resource for you. The one thing, and these are our tips, just as reminders, that we're asking everybody, we're really telling you all to stay on the right side of the law here, is as a nonpartisan organization, the only partnership I will tell you not to do is don't partner with partisan organizations. If somebody is working for a candidate or a political party, this is not the year to be partnering with them. Those are not our partners, but there are plenty of folks in your community, plenty of folks with whom we work on a regular basis who share our values on these issues that we want to work with. And as Robin has said, please contact us. Feel free to reach us at policy@aauw.org. And we're here as a resource for you. And then, Robin, if you have any closing thoughts.
I really appreciate how many people have joined us tonight and dropped questions in the chat and just bottom line are here. And so we really look forward to engaging with everyone this election season. And I look forward to seeing more messages and questions via email now that they have this email address after these webinars. It's always very exciting to see what folks are thinking about afterwards. So I look forward to engaging with y'all.
And as I mentioned, we will continue to answer your questions. We haven't been able to answer all of them right now. I do see some questions and comments about different partnerships that people have with the League of Women Voters and Poor People's Campaign working to register voters, other nonprofits that are engaged in registration events. Absolutely. Please keep doing that. We definitely want to encourage that. I see some other specific questions, and Rob and I will go through those, and we'll definitely follow back up with you. So consider us your resource and partner, and thank you for all the work that you're doing this year. And with that, we'll talk with you all soon.
Thank you.